For the first time in 5 years, I smiled. It wasn't a big smile. It was a small, quiet thing, a simple turning up of the corners of my mouth, but it felt like the sun rising after a long, dark night. Across the polished mahogany table, Eleanor's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. Her carefully applied lipstick was smeared where she'd wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, and her knuckles were white as she gripped the arms of her chair. She looked like a volcano about to explode. Next to her, her daughter Beatrice, my sister-in-law, had gone completely pale, the color draining from her face like water down a sink. She just stared, her eyes wide and vacant, as if she couldn't comprehend the words that had just been spoken. The lawyer, a calm and steady man named Mr. Harrison, simply adjusted his glasses and looked at me. He gave a nearly imperceptible nod, a silent acknowledgement of a game well played. And in that quiet, opulent office, with the scent of old books and lemon polish in the air, I finally allowed myself to feel it. Victory. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This story doesn't start in a lawyer's office with my late husband's family imploding. It starts 5 years and 1 week ago with a simple, unexpected notification from my bank. It starts with $50,000. To understand what that money meant, you have to understand the 5 years that came before it. They were gray years. That's the only word for them. A long, monotonous stretch of gray, like a permanent overcast sky after the sun of my life. My husband Mark had been extinguished. We had a good life. It wasn't extravagant, but it was ours. We had a small house with a garden I adored, a mortgage that was manageable, and a love that felt boundless. Mark was my everything. He was kind, funny, and had this incredible ability to see the good in everyone, even in his own family. That was his only blind spot. His mother, Eleanor, was a woman carved from ice. She saw the world in terms of assets and liabilities, social standing and appearances. I, a librarian's daughter with no family money to speak of, was firmly in the liability column. She never said it outright, of course. Eleanor was a master of the subtle cut, the backhanded compliment, the condescending smile that made you feel 2 inches tall. "Oh, Clara, that dress is so brave of you," she'd say, her eyes sweeping over a perfectly nice sundress I'd bought on sale. Or, "It must be so relaxing not having to worry about keeping up appearances." His sister, Beatrice, was a different brand of poison. She was a pale imitation of her mother, lacking Eleanor's sharp intellect, but making up for it with a petty, seething jealousy. She was married to a man with a trust fund and a golf handicap, and she seemed to believe this gave her a title and a crown. She treated me like the hired help. At family dinners, she'd ask me to clear plates or refill wine glasses, always with a saccharine sweet, "You're so much better at this sort of thing than I am, darling." Mark saw it, but he handled it with a gentle deflection. He'd intercept Beatrice on her way to the kitchen, taking the plates from my hand and saying, "Let's leave it for later, Bea. Clara's telling me about this new book she's reading." He ran interference constantly, a quiet buffer between me and them. He always used to say, "Don't let them get to you, honey. Their bark is worse than their bite. They just don't know any better." I loved him for his loyalty, for his unwavering defense of me, but I never understood his defense of them. Then he got sick. It was fast, aggressive, and brutal, a cancer that came out of nowhere and tore through him with vicious speed. 6 months from diagnosis to the end. Those 6 months were a blur of hospitals, hushed doctors' consultations, and nights spent holding him, pretending we were both strong enough to beat it. Eleanor and Beatrice's behavior during that time was a masterclass in performative grief. They would sweep into the hospital room, all dramatic sighs and sorrowful looks, bringing inappropriate gifts like gossip magazines and boxes of chocolates he couldn't eat. They'd stay for exactly 15 minutes, long enough to be seen, and then leave, complaining in the hallway about the smell of antiseptic and the inconvenience of parking. I heard them once. "I just don't see why she looks so haggard," Beatrice whispered loudly to her mother. "It's not like she's the one who's dying." I was sitting right on the other side of the door, holding Mark's frail hand. He squeezed it, a weak but definite pressure. He'd heard them too. He looked at me, his eyes full of a pain that had nothing to do with the disease ravaging his body. "I'm sorry, Clara," he whispered, his voice raspy. "I'm so sorry." "It's okay," I lied, stroking his hair. "They're just worried." But we both knew that wasn't true. When he died, the world went from color to black and white. The grief was a physical weight, pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe, to think, to exist. At the funeral, Eleanor clung to my arm, not for support, but for show. She played the part of the bereaved mother perfectly, accepting condolences with a tragic, trembling lip. Beatrice stood beside her, dabbing at dry eyes with a silk handkerchief. They were actors on a stage, and I was just a piece of the set dressing. The performance ended the day after the funeral. That's when the questions started. "Mark must have had a significant life insurance policy, of course," Eleanor stated, not asked, as she surveyed my living room, her eyes cataloging every item. "There was a small one," I said quietly. "It paid for the funeral and a bit of the medical debt." Her face tightened. "And his savings? His investments? He was a smart boy. He must have had investments." The will reading was a week later. It was simple and straightforward. Mark left me the house, the car, and his personal savings account, which held about $20,000 after everything was settled. It was enough to keep me afloat, just barely. He left his mother and sister a few sentimental items, his father's old watch for Eleanor, a collection of first-edition books for Beatrice. The silence in the lawyer's small office was deafening. Eleanor stared at the lawyer as if he'd just insulted her personally. "That's it?" she finally spat out. "That's all?" "I'm afraid so," the lawyer said, a kind man named Mr. Peters who looked deeply uncomfortable. "This is ridiculous," Beatrice chimed in, her voice shrill. "Daddy's inheritance. Where did all of Daddy's inheritance go? Mark was supposed to have invested it." Their father had passed away years ago, leaving Mark a modest sum, which he'd used as the down payment on our house. Our house. "He spent it on this little box," Eleanor said, waving a dismissive hand. "He wasted it all on her." And that was the beginning of the 5-year war. They were convinced there was more. A secret account, a hidden portfolio, a treasure map buried in the backyard. Their greed was a ravenous, insatiable thing. They called me constantly. They'd show up at my door unannounced, demanding to look through Mark's old files, his desk, his closet. "We're just looking for sentimental things," Beatrice would lie, her eyes scanning for bank statements or keys to a non-existent safe deposit box. They tried to convince me to sell the house. "You can't possibly afford the upkeep on your own, Clara," Eleanor would say, her tone dripping with false concern. "It would be much more sensible to sell it, split the profit, and move somewhere more appropriate for you." More appropriate for me, of course, meant a tiny apartment far away where they'd never have to see me again. I always said no. This house was the last piece of Mark I had. Every scuff on the floor, every nail in the wall held a memory. Leaving it felt like a betrayal. So I stayed. I got a second job at the local community college library in the evenings to make ends meet. I learned to fix a leaky faucet, to mow the lawn, to live with the profound silence of an empty house. The years passed in a monotonous rhythm of work, bills, and lonely nights. Their harassment became a background noise in my life. Sometimes it would flare up. Beatrice once called to tell me she'd seen me buying generic brand cereal at the grocery store. "It's just so sad to see you struggling like this," she'd said, her voice oozing with fake sympathy. If Mark had just been more responsible with his money. They spread rumors around town that I was a spendthrift, that I had chased away my wealthy in-laws and was now destitute. I learned to live with it. I built a wall around my heart, brick by painful brick. I had my work, my garden, and my memories of Mark. It wasn't a happy life, but it was a life. I had found a quiet, if lonely, equilibrium. And then, last Tuesday, everything changed. I was paying bills online, a dreary weekly ritual. I logged into my bank account, my eyes scanning the familiar, depressingly low numbers. Checking account, $642. Savings account, $1,208. And then I saw it. A new entry. A third account I had never seen before. It was labeled MH Trust Disbursement. And the balance next to it made my heart stop. $50,000. I stared at the screen, blinking. It had to be a mistake. A glitch in the system. Banks made errors all the time, right? I refreshed the page. The number was still there. $50,000. I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me. This was more money than I had seen in one place in my entire life. It was life-changing money. It was enough to pay off the rest of the mortgage. It was enough to fix the roof that had been leaking for 2 winters. It was enough to finally, truly breathe. My first thought, after the initial shock, was fear. Where did it come from? Whose was it? Was I going to get in trouble? I immediately called the bank. The woman on the phone was patient but unhelpful. "Yes, ma'am, I can confirm the deposit," she said in a bored monotone. It was an electronic transfer from a trust fund held at Harrison & Sons Legal. Harrison & Sons. The name meant nothing to me. Mark's lawyer was Mr. Peters. "Can you tell me who set up the trust?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "I'm sorry, ma'am, I don't have access to that information. You would need to contact the law firm directly." She gave me the number. I scribbled it down on the back of an envelope, my hand shaking. For the rest of the day, I was a wreck. I kept logging into my bank account just to make sure the number was still there. It was like a mythical creature had taken up residence in my finances. Part of me was terrified. Another part, a small, cautious part, was starting to feel a flicker of something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. The next morning, I called the number for Harrison & Sons. A crisp, professional voice answered. "Harrison & Sons, how may I direct your call?" "Hello?" I stammered. "My name is Clara Hale. I believe you may have made a deposit into my bank account." There was a pause, then the sound of typing. Yes, Mrs. Hale. We were expecting your call. Mr. Harrison would like to see you. Are you available to come in this afternoon?" It was happening so fast. "Yes," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Yes, I can be there." The law firm was in the old part of downtown, in a stately brick building with a brass plaque by the door. It was a world away from Mr. Peters's humble office above the bakery. This place smelled of old money and power. A receptionist with perfect hair led me down a quiet, carpeted hallway to a large office with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. A man stood up from behind a massive oak desk. He was older, perhaps in his late 60s, with a kind face and sharp, intelligent eyes behind a pair of wire-rimmed glasses. "Mrs. Hale," he said, his voice warm, "I'm David Harrison. It's a pleasure to finally meet you. Please, have a seat." I sat down in a plush leather chair that sighed as I sank into it. My hands were clasped so tightly in my lap they were numb. "Mr. Harrison," I began, "I think there's been a terrible mistake." He smiled gently. "I can assure you, there has been no mistake." He folded his hands on the desk. "Clara. May I call you Clara? Your husband was a very wise man, and a very patient one." My breath caught in my throat. "Mark? You knew Mark?" "I did," he said, though not as well as my primary client in this matter did, Mark's grandfather, Arthur. I stared at him, confused. His grandfather? Mark's grandparents passed away before I ever met him. That's what Eleanor always said. Mr. Harrison's smile became a little tighter, a little sadder. That is what Eleanor wanted everyone to believe. The truth is, Eleanor and her father, Arthur, had a falling out many years ago, a profound one. She essentially wrote him out of her life, but Arthur never stopped keeping tabs on his family, and he never stopped loving his grandson. My mind was reeling. Mark had a grandfather? A living grandfather? When Mark got his diagnosis, Mr. Harrison continued, his voice soft, he knew he didn't have much time, and he knew his mother. He knew what would happen after he was gone. The pieces started to click into place, forming a picture I was only just beginning to comprehend. He came to see Arthur, the lawyer said. They had always maintained a quiet relationship, unbeknownst to Eleanor. Mark was worried about you, Clara. He knew his mother and sister would not be kind. He knew they would see you as an obstacle to what they believed was their money. I could only nod, a lump forming in my throat. He knew, all this time, he knew exactly what they were capable of. So, he and Arthur devised a plan, Mr. Harrison said, leaning forward. A trust was established. It was funded by Arthur, a significant amount. The terms were very specific, crafted by Mark himself. He slid a document across the desk towards me. The trust was to remain dormant for exactly 5 years from the date of Mark's passing. On the 5th anniversary, a preliminary disbursement of $50,000 was to be made to you. He paused, letting the words sink in. But that was only the first part. The primary function of the trust was a test. A test? I whispered. Yes, a test of character. Arthur wanted to leave his considerable fortune to his family, but he would not do so if he felt they were undeserving. Mark suggested this as the ultimate metric. He tapped the document. The final conditions of the trust, and indeed of Arthur's own will, are tied to how Eleanor and Beatrice treated you in the 5 years after Mark's death. The trust has been quietly monitored by my office. We have records of their attempts to force you from your home. We have logs of their harassing phone calls. We have copies of the letters they sent. I was stunned into silence. They had been building a case. For 5 years, every cruel word, every greedy demand, every petty act of malice had been recorded, documented, and filed away. Mark knew you were strong, Clara, Mr. Harrison said. He knew you wouldn't break. He knew you would protect the home you built together. He bet everything on your resilience. Tears were streaming down my face now, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of awe, of a love so profound it had reached across time to protect me. All those lonely nights I had felt abandoned, but I was never alone. Mark had been there all along in the architecture of this incredible patient plan. So what happens now? I asked, my voice thick with emotion. Now, Mr. Harrison said, a glint in his eye, comes the fun part. He explained the rest of the strategy. The $50,000 was bait. The final condition of Arthur's will was tied to how Eleanor and Beatrice would react to me suddenly coming into a small amount of money. Mark predicted they would become desperate, he said. He predicted they would see it as proof of the secret fortune they always believed existed, and they would do anything to get their hands on it. The plan was simple. I was to let it slip that I had received some money from a forgotten policy of Mark's. Then I was to do nothing. I was to play the part I had been playing for 5 years, the timid, slightly overwhelmed widow. I was to endure their final desperate assault, and I was to document every single word. Arthur would like to meet you, of course, Mr. Harrison added, but not yet. He feels his appearance would be more impactful at the final meeting. I left the lawyer's office in a daze. The world looked different. The gray skies of my life were beginning to break apart, and rays of sunlight were streaming through. I wasn't just a widow anymore. I was a warrior in a battle I hadn't even known I was fighting, and I was about to win. That evening, I made the call. I chose Beatrice. She was the weaker link, the more excitable and less intelligent of the two. I practiced my lines, making my voice sound hesitant and confused. "Beatrice?" I said when she answered. "It's Clara." "What do you want?" she snapped. Her tone was as sharp as broken glass. I'm sorry to bother you," I stammered. "It's just, something strange has happened. I got a letter today about an old investment of Mark's, one I never knew about. There's some money." I let the last word hang in the air. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Money," she repeated, her voice suddenly changing, becoming slick with interest. "What money? How much money?" I'm not really sure," I lied. "It's all very confusing, legal papers and things, but it seems to be significant." "Significant," she squeaked. "I have to go, Beatrice. I thought you should know." I hung up the phone before she could ask any more questions. I set my phone on the kitchen counter and activated the recording app Mr. Harrison had instructed me to install. I didn't have to wait long, 37 seconds to be exact. The phone rang. It was Eleanor. Her voice was a low, dangerous purr. "Clara, Beatrice just told me some very interesting news. It seems you've been holding out on us." The escalation had begun. For the next 2 weeks, my life became a living hell. But this time, it was different. Before, their cruelty had been 1,000 tiny cuts that slowly bled me dry. Now, every insult, every threat felt like a victory. Every vicious word was another nail in their own coffin. They descended on my house like a conquering army. Eleanor came first, marching up my front walk as if she owned it. She didn't knock. She just walked in. "We need to talk," she announced, striding into my kitchen where I was pretending to read the paper. "Eleanor," I said, feigning surprise. "What a surprise." "Cut the act, Clara," she sneered. "The money, Mark's money, where is it?" It was deposited into my account," I said, making my voice tremble. "Your account?" she scoffed. "That is family money. It belongs to me. Mark was simply holding it for me. He always managed my finances after his father died." This was a spectacular lie. Mark wouldn't have trusted Eleanor to manage a piggy bank. "I don't think that's right, Eleanor," I said softly. "It doesn't matter what you think," she snapped, her voice rising. "That money is mine. You are a guest in this house, living off my son's generosity. You will transfer that money to my account by the end of the day, or I will call my lawyer. I will have you thrown out of here so fast your head will spin." She was practically vibrating with rage and greed. I just looked at her, my face a mask of fear. Inside, I was jubilant. This was perfect. Better than I could have imagined. I need to think about it," I whispered. "There's nothing to think about," she shrieked. "You will do as you are told." She stormed out, slamming the door so hard a picture frame fell off the wall. I picked it up. It was a photo of me and Mark on our wedding day. I smiled, a real, genuine smile, and put it back in its place. Beatrice's approach was different. She tried manipulation. She arrived the next day with a cheap bottle of wine and a pained expression. "Clara, darling," she cooed, enveloping me in a cloud of expensive perfume. "I am so worried about Mother. She's not herself. This business with the money has just stirred up so much grief for her." She sat at my kitchen table, pouring 2 glasses of wine with a theatrical sigh. "We know you'll do the right thing," she said, pushing a glass towards me. "Mark would have wanted his mother to be taken care of. He loved her so much." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. "He would want what's fair, of course," she continued, not noticing my silence. "And it's only fair that the money goes back to the family, to us. You have the house, after all. That's more than enough for you." She then launched into a 15-minute monologue about all the things she and her mother needed. A new roof for Eleanor's house, a trip to Europe for Beatrice, to recover from the stress of it all, new furniture, a new car for her husband. It was a bottomless pit of want. "Of course, we would give you a little something," she added as an afterthought. "A finder's fee, if you will. Maybe $1,000 for your trouble." $1,000. Out of 50,000. The sheer audacity of it was almost comical. I played my part. I wrung my hands. I looked conflicted. I said I needed more time. "Don't take too long, Clara," she warned, her sweet tone vanishing. "Mother is not a patient woman, and neither am I." The phone calls were relentless. They called me at work. They called me late at night. They left long, rambling voicemails that swung wildly between threats and crocodile tears. I saved every single one. I transcribed them, dated them, and emailed them to Mr. Harrison. His replies were always short and encouraging. "Excellent work. This is precisely what we needed. Just a little longer now." The final piece of the puzzle arrived a week later. It was a letter from a lawyer I'd never heard of. Some bottom feeder Eleanor must have found in the phone book. It was full of legal jargon and empty threats. It accused me of misappropriating estate funds, of elder abuse, of fraud. It demanded the immediate return of the full sum of $50,000 to Eleanor Hale, or legal proceedings would be initiated. I scanned it and sent a copy straight to Mr. Harrison. His reply came within minutes. "It's time." The next day, I had a visitor. I was in the garden pruning my roses when a car I didn't recognize pulled into the driveway. An elderly man got out. He was tall and lean, with a shock of white hair and the same kind, intelligent eyes I remembered from Mark's photographs of his father. He walked towards me, a warm smile on his face. "Clara," he said, his voice gentle, "I'm Arthur. It is an honor to finally meet the woman my grandson loved so much." I dropped my pruning shears. Tears instantly welled in my eyes. He looked so much like Mark. He pulled me into a hug, and it felt like coming home. It felt like a piece of my husband was standing right there in my garden. We sat on the porch for hours. He told me stories about Mark as a little boy. He told me about his daughter, Eleanor, about her selfishness and greed that had been present even in childhood. "She broke her mother's heart," he said, his voice heavy with old sadness. "And she tried to break Mark's spirit, but he was too good for that. He got his kindness from his father." He listened as I told him about the past 5 years. He held my hand, his grip firm and reassuring, as I recounted the petty cruelties, the constant pressure, the soul-crushing loneliness. "You are a remarkable woman, Clara Hale," he said when I was finished. "You have more strength in your little finger than my daughter and granddaughter have in their entire bodies. Mark chose well." He looked at me, his eyes serious. "Are you ready for this to be over?" I took a deep breath, the scent of roses filling my lungs. "Yes," I said. "I am." Mr. Harrison arranged the meeting. He sent a formal letter to Eleanor and Beatrice, as well as to their new lawyer. It stated that a final meeting was required to resolve outstanding matters related to the estate of Mark Hale and the associated family trusts. They took the bait. Their lawyer called Mr. Harrison, puffed up with self-importance, assuming his threatening letter had worked. They believed they were walking into a surrender. They thought they were coming to collect their prize. The day of the meeting, I took my time getting ready. I chose a simple, elegant blue dress, one of Mark's favorites. I did my hair and makeup carefully, not to look flashy, but to look composed. I was no longer the haggard, grieving widow. I was a woman on the verge of her own liberation. I drove to Harrison and Sons and was shown into a large, intimidating conference room. Mr. Harrison was already there, arranging files at the head of the long mahogany table. Arthur was seated in a comfortable chair by the window, looking out at the city below. He stood as I entered and gave me a warm, encouraging smile. "Ready for the fireworks, my dear?" he whispered. "Ready," I said, my voice steady. We didn't have to wait long. Eleanor and Beatrice swept in, their lawyer trailing behind them like a nervous poodle. They were dressed for a victory parade. Eleanor was in a severe black suit with a string of pearls, looking like a villain from a Disney movie. Beatrice wore a bright pink dress that was entirely too cheerful for the occasion, a triumphant smirk plastered on her face. Then they saw Arthur. The change was instantaneous. Beatrice's smirk vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed gape. Eleanor froze mid-stride, her face contorting into a mask of shock and fury. "Father!" she hissed. "What in God's name are you doing here?" "Hello, Eleanor," Arthur said calmly, his voice devoid of warmth. "I thought it was time we had a family chat. Please sit." They sat stiffly, their lawyer looking utterly bewildered. "What is the meaning of this, Harrison?" Eleanor demanded, rounding on the lawyer. Mr. Harrison adjusted his glasses and looked at her over the top of them. "The meaning, Mrs. Hale, is that you have been operating under a severe misapprehension." He began the meeting. He didn't start with Mark's estate. He started with Arthur's. He spoke in a calm, methodical monotone, laying out the vastness of Arthur's fortune. Properties, stocks, bonds, art collections. It was a staggering amount of wealth, far beyond anything Eleanor and Beatrice could have imagined. I watched their faces. Their initial anger at seeing Arthur was slowly being replaced by a dawning, greedy excitement. They thought they were here for a reconciliation. They thought the prodigal father was finally welcoming them back into the fold. Oh, they were so wrong. "As you know," Mr. Harrison continued, "Arthur's will has long stipulated that the bulk of his estate would pass to you, Eleanor, and subsequently to your daughter, Beatrice." Eleanor preened, shooting a smug look in my direction. "However," Mr. Harrison said, and the word hung in the air like a guillotine, "there was always a condition, a morality clause, if you will." He picked up a thick, bound document. This clause was updated 6 years ago at the request of both Arthur and his grandson, Mark Hale. He began to read. The clause was simple. It stated that for Eleanor and Beatrice to inherit, they must have demonstrated, in the 5 years following Mark's death, kindness, compassion, and familial duty towards his surviving spouse. Eleanor let out a short, sharp laugh. "Well, of course we did. We were a constant source of support for Clara in her time of grief." "Were you?" Mr. Harrison asked, his voice dangerously quiet. He then opened another file. "Let's review the evidence, shall we?" And he began to read again. He read transcripts of the voicemails. Quote, "You are nothing but a gold-digging parasite, and I will see you on the street." End quote. Voicemail from Eleanor Hale, dated October 14th, 2 years ago. He read excerpts from the letters. Quote, "It would be in your best interest to sign the house over to us immediately. We know you cannot afford it, and we are prepared to take legal action to reclaim what is rightfully ours." End quote. Letter from Beatrice Collins, dated May 3rd, 4 years ago. He had everything. The dates, the times, the exact vicious words. He read out the report from the private investigator Arthur had hired, detailing their campaign of slander against me in the community. He read out Beatrice's pathetic offer of a finder's fee of $1,000. He concluded with the threatening letter from their lawyer, who was now sweating profusely and looking at his shoes. The room was silent save for the rustle of paper and Mr. Harrison's calm, damning voice. With each new piece of evidence, the color drained further from Eleanor and Beatrice's faces. The arrogance and triumph had evaporated, replaced by a dawning, sickening horror. They were being systematically dismantled, their cruelty laid bare on a polished mahogany table. And finally, Mr. Harrison said, closing the file, "We come to the matter of the $50,000 disbursement." He looked directly at Eleanor. "That money, Mrs. Hale, was the final part of the test. It was bait. Mark and Arthur predicted that the appearance of a small amount of money would trigger your worst impulses. They were correct." He let the silence stretch for a long moment. "By your actions over the past 5 years, and particularly over the last 2 weeks, you have both failed to meet the conditions of the morality clause in Arthur's will. You have failed spectacularly." Beatrice started to sob, a pathetic gulping sound. Eleanor just stared, her eyes wide with disbelief. "No," she whispered. "No, he wouldn't. Father, you wouldn't." Arthur, who had been silent throughout the entire presentation, finally spoke. He didn't look at his daughter. He looked at me. "I gave you a chance, Eleanor," he said, his voice filled with a profound, ancient sadness. I gave you 5 years to show me you had a single ounce of decency in you. All you had to do was be kind to the woman my grandson loved. That was it. That was the only thing I asked of you." He shook his head slowly. "But you couldn't do it. The greed was too strong. The cruelty was too ingrained. You are your mother's daughter, through and through." He then turned his gaze upon her, and his eyes were as hard and cold as diamonds. "So no, I will not be leaving my fortune to you. You and your daughter will not see a single cent." That was when the screaming started. It was a raw, primal sound of pure fury erupting from Eleanor's throat. "You can't!" she shrieked, lunging to her feet. "It's mine! It's my birthright!" "It was never your birthright," Arthur said calmly. "It was a gift, and the offer of that gift has been rescinded." Mr. Harrison delivered the final killing blow. He slid one last document across the table. "As per the codicil activated by your failure to meet the terms, the entirety of the Arthur Vance estate, including all properties, assets, and liquid funds, will now be transferred into a new trust." He paused, and for the first time, he smiled. A wide, satisfied smile. The sole beneficiary and trustee of which is Mrs. Clara Hale. And that's when I smiled back. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Eleanor's shrieking devolved into a string of curses and threats that were both shocking and pitiful. Beatrice was simply a puddle of incoherent sobs, her mascara running in black rivers down her pale cheeks. Their lawyer, looking as if he wished the ground would swallow him whole, tried to stammer out some sort of objection, but Mr. Harrison cut him off with a single, icy glare. Security was called. 2 large, impassive men escorted a struggling, screaming Eleanor and a wailing Beatrice from the conference room. The last thing I heard as the door closed was Eleanor shrieking my name, turning it into a curse. The silence they left behind was beautiful. Arthur sighed, a long, weary sound. "Well," he said, turning to me, "I do believe that went as expected." The consequences for them were total. The house Eleanor lived in, the one she had lorded over me for years, it was in Arthur's name. An eviction notice was served the following week. Beatrice's husband, the one with the trust fund, filed for divorce less than a month later. Apparently, his family had no tolerance for scandal, and being publicly disinherited from one of the city's largest fortunes was a scandal of the highest order. The story spread through their social circle like wildfire. They were pariahs. Their friends abandoned them. They were ruined, financially and socially, by their own greed. A few weeks after the meeting, there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find Eleanor standing on my porch. She was a shadow of her former self. Her hair was unkempt, her clothes were rumpled, and her eyes were wild with desperation. She tried to smile, a ghastly, trembling thing. "Clara," she began, her voice cracking, I have been a fool. I was mad with grief. I didn't mean any of it. You must believe me." She was trying one last time, one final pathetic attempt at manipulation. She reached out as if to touch my arm. "We're family, Clara. You and I. Mark would want us to forgive each other. He would want you to help me." I looked at this woman who had made my life a misery, this woman who had danced on her own son's grave in a desperate scrabble for money. I felt nothing, no anger, no pity, just a profound, quiet emptiness where my feelings for her used to be. I didn't say a word. I just looked her in the eye, and very slowly, very deliberately, I closed the door in her face. I heard her start to sob on the other side. I turned, walked into my sunny kitchen, and made myself a cup of tea. That was the end of that chapter, and the beginning of a new one. Which brings me back to today. I'm not in that little house anymore. I sold it respectfully and lovingly to a young couple just starting out. I kept the memories, but I let go of the ghosts. I now live in a beautiful home on a few acres of land just outside the city. The garden is 10 times the size of my old one, and it's my personal paradise. Arthur lives in the guest cottage. He's the grandfather I never had, full of wisdom, terrible jokes, and an endless supply of stories about Mark. We've healed each other, I think. I'm sitting on my back porch now, a warm mug of coffee in my hands, watching the morning sun burn the mist off the hills. A man walks out of the house, holding a second mug. His name is David. He's a landscape architect I hired to help with the gardens, and he just stayed. He's kind and quiet and funny, and when he looks at me, he sees me. Not a widow, not an heiress, just Clara. He hands me the coffee and kisses the top of my head. "What are you thinking about?" he asks, his voice warm. I look at the old photo of Mark I keep on the small table out here. In it, he's laughing, his head thrown back in pure joy. "Just saying thank you," I say softly. Arthur once told me something his own grandmother used to say. "Character isn't about who you are when everyone is watching," he'd said. "It's about who you are when you think you're completely alone." For 5 years, Eleanor and Beatrice thought I was alone. They thought no one was watching, but Mark was, and he made sure they got exactly what they deserved. My life isn't gray anymore. It's filled with color. The vibrant green of the rolling hills, the brilliant blue of the sky, and the warm, steady gold of a new sunrise. And for the first time in a very long time, I am truly, completely at peace.